This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who enjoys cranberries in her cheese during the holidays, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 94 and the final episode of 2018. Thank you so much for being here today. And if you are a first-time listener, I hope this episode will be really helpful for you in figuring out which episodes you need to go back and listen to. If you are a new-ish member, then hopefully you will find some that you haven't already heard and you can go back and check them out and start 2019 all caught up with all the episodes. Or if you are someone who has been here from the very beginning, thank you for supporting me along the way. And I hope 2019 is going to bring you a lot of episodes that you are going to enjoy just as much. I cannot believe it's already the end of the year. And we've had a great year here at Running for Real. I've been really excited seeing the Running for Real Superstars community grow and how it's developed. If you're not already a member, you can come join us at tinamuir.com/superstars. And I really hope you will consider doing that because it is a fantastic place to be and just full of so many wonderful people. Now, last week we had an episode with Steph Bruce. This was the episode that was missed. You heard me talk about, or if you have known and been following me for a while, you would have heard me say that I did lose one of my episodes earlier in the year, was devastating, so annoyed at myself for losing it. But Steph Bruce was that episode, had a fantastic chat with her, and I was so annoyed because really when you lose a conversation, that conversation is gone forever. You know, I wouldn't want us to try and just replicate what we said because it's never going to be the same and it's just going to feel very fake. And she would be trying to remember what she said. I'd be trying to remember what I said in the conversation. So I was wanting to leave it a little while and I thought I would wait until after Steph had done California International Marathon, which she did at the beginning of December. And also she's done New York Marathon since that initial interview. So we got to talk about that as well. She ran a PR at CIM, so that was great to kind of hear her perspective on that. And doing it only 4 weeks after running at New York City Marathon. So I hope you will go back and check that one out if you are interested. Now, today we are going to be going through the episodes that are your favorites of the year. Some of these are also my favorites, although I swear I say sometimes that all of them are my favorites, but I do secretly have a few that are my favorites. Although they're like having all your own children, you never can really say. But yeah, so these are some of your favorites. I asked you in my Superstars community to give me the episodes that you like the most and which parts of those episodes, because it's all very well me listing off, 10 or more even episodes for you to go listen to, but then it's another thing to know which parts were particularly inspiring and which parts are going to capture your attention and make you feel like, wow, I really need to go back and listen to this. So I asked you and you gave me some amazing results. There was actually, I couldn't even include them all in this episode unless I wanted this episode to go on for 3 hours. So I have kind of picked and chosen from there, but I hope you will consider going to check out all of the new episodes and starting from the beginning if you are a newer listener. Now, we are just going to take a moment to thank our friends at Body Health who are actually this is the 4th and final week of their giveaway month. They're giving away a 300 count bottle of Perfect Amino every week. This is the final week. So we're going to go thank them for the final time in 2018. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my book, which is coming out in just a few weeks. I'm really excited about it. I hope you are going to support me. Yes, the book is called Overcoming Amenorrhea, and it is about getting your period back. But it also has a big portion focused on my story and just kind of what I've been through. And some friends who have read through it have said that it's not just for people who have amenorrhea. It should be read by everyone who has some kind of confidence issue. And if you want to support me, if you guys help me get to the #1 bestseller in the category on Amazon, I can't even describe to you how much that will change things forever. Like if I can get a bestseller author ranking on Amazon, which shouldn't be too difficult if you guys all support me and want to help me. If I can do that, that will help me in future when I write future books and kind of whatever I do in the future, you can never take that away from me. So it would be just a few dollars of your money, but in addition, you will be supporting me. So if you've been enjoying these episodes, I'm asking you, please consider pre-ordering or purchasing the book the first week it comes out on the 21st of January. I will be giving you more information on that later in the episode. But let's go thank Body Health and get to the episode. Thank you to Body Health for sponsoring this episode of the Running For Real podcast. I am so thankful to Body Health and their support, not just of this podcast, but of me through their perfect amino products. They help me recover faster and feel better. You too can get 10% off at bodyhealth.com using code TINA10. All right, are you ready for the first episode? Okay, so earlier in the year, this was maybe in March, somewhere around there, we had an episode with Kim Jones, who is a 2:26 marathoner. She was second in Boston Marathon, second in New York City Marathon. And really, even though she has these impressive results, it was the story behind her running that was so appealing. She had this traumatic life. She overcame a lot, gave up her daughter Rachel for adoption, and later got her back. But we just had a fantastic conversation, and I thought this part of the episode was really powerful, particularly talking about, one thing Kim really embodied was how to not let the fear of failure kind of ruin anything that you're going to be doing and not let it stop you. So I'm going to pass it over to Kim, and this is our conversation. What was it that kind of kept you coming back when these things kept testing you? To not give up and think, well, running is just pointless compared to, what's going on, or feeling sorry for yourself in any way?
I think for me, it was, I think several of my brothers and sisters struggled. Some, a couple of them went to prison, and others lost their families because of drugs and alcohol. And, just their lives were just really messed up. And what I found, for me anyway, is I took responsibility for anything, that I was in control of. If I messed up, it's like, I'm sorry, it's my fault, and, I'm going to try to do better next time. Or what I found with most people who really pretty much give up and allow, the negative things to come into their life, such as fast food, drugs and alcohol, or whatever I can think of. I think they're not as willing to take responsibility for their actions.
Yes.
And the other thing I learned is I grew up in a place where all I knew was dysfunction. And my siblings and, my cousins and a lot of us, we were just in this dysfunctional cycle. And it's much tougher, more difficult to work your way out. Much easier to stay in the dysfunction and continue living like that. And so I fought my way out, and that was tough. It was really hard to just dig myself out and stay out. And I was capable of doing that early on. And I believe part of that was because I did have Rachel when I was 16 years old. That taught me, I had to stay there. I need to, deal with it. I need to take care of her. I always wanted to get her back into my life. And that was one of my goals. Once, I finished high school, I did go to college. And once I started my family and I had my daughter, Jamie, that's when I knew I was going to get her back. I had to figure out a way to do that because, she was already adopted.
Yeah.
But I found a way, and believe it or not, running gave me the courage and strength to do so. And winning the 2018's marathon and winning the U.S. championships and going further with, financially, gave me the means to do so. Yeah. But also it gave me the courage to leave a husband who was abusive. So it just gave me all this courage of, to get out of that abusive relationship. And he didn't want anything to do with my daughter, Rachel. He forbid me to see her.
Wow.
And so it was like, I just had the courage, and I knew if I were to win that race, there's so much riding on it,
yeah,
that I would get, I would have the means to leave my husband, which I was about to do anyway, but I needed, to figure out how to do that. And the money came immediately. I got bonus money. I got prize money. I got money to go to the World Championship. So it all came to me at once at the right time. And I was able to move out of the abusive relationship, bring Rachel back into my life, and she, grew up and lived with me for the rest of her life.
Yeah, and that in itself, I mean, making that decision, getting out of that abusive relationship, that, let alone everything else, takes a lot of courage and strength to be able to do that. There's so many people that do end up kind of stuck in situations because they can't get out of these relationships, can't bring themselves to quite take that step. So, well done to you. And do you think, was that in your mind when you were in that Twin Cities race, this is my way out? Or were you kind of at that time just focused on, doing your best as a runner?
It was on my mind continuously because my marriage and dysfunction and the abuse was happening until it came to a full life or death situation. And I did not want my daughter Jamie living like that. And I was feeling like I was falling back into that dysfunction that I grew up in as a child. And there was no way I was ever going to even, be close to that situation again. And I knew I was working towards getting Rachel back. Before that time, I was trying to figure out how I could manage it. And I was, looking into maybe finding, actually I did have a job lined up just in case, this running didn't work out. So I did have a backup plan. It wasn't like, I'm going to go here and I'm going to run this race and then I'll, win some money and get my daughter back. And that's not really what was in my mind because I didn't know what I was capable of doing. But I did have a job lined up at a local college in Spokane where I was going to help with athletic team. Working with them on nutrition and nutrition guidelines. And so I had a job. So I planned to leave anyway, but it was a matter of winning the Twin Cities Marathon gave me the opportunity to get Rachel back and give me the funds to do so.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that happened and you were able to do so. And you mentioned a few minutes ago about you didn't have this fear of failure. Now, for someone listening who, really does struggle with that fear of failure, if they kind of actually are real with themselves and kind of will accept it. Do you have any idea of what it was that kind of allowed you to not have that fear of failure when that's, something that actually really gets most runners is that fear of not being good enough? What was it in you that kind of allowed you to not have that as a concern?
Well, I think, I was a middle child growing up. I had 11 siblings, with half brothers and sisters and so forth. But I was that middle child, always trying to prove myself, always. I mean, it was like nobody could, I could talk and nobody would listen to me. I was just kind of, so I had to do special things to get attention, sometimes silly things like, jumping off the highest dock, even though it was dangerous and I could have killed myself, but just getting the attention. And so I started out feeling like I wasn't good enough. So whatever I did, it was going to be, at least I tried, and it made me better as a person, as an athlete, as just bravery, whatever. But whatever I did, I became better. And then when I did, run, even in my track races in high school, I was never beaten in my races. And I was, in the beginning, I was afraid. It's like, I'm going to let everybody down. And then, I ran my first year, track races and did fine. I, went to the state meet and won the state mile and the quarter mile and the half mile. And I was on both winning relays. Yep. And it wasn't expected. I was just thrilled every time I won. And it was just so thrilling. But then after I, had to take a year off and I had Rachel and I had to come back and run track. It was my senior year. That was the only time I felt I had to prove myself. I was frightened to death. And it wasn't so much the racing, it was just people were going to see me again after, I was ashamed. I was ashamed that, and I gave her up for adoption. I was suffering through that. I was just a kind of emotional mess my senior year. And the running put everything back into a good place for me. People came up and congratulated me and told me I was strong and I made the right decision. And again, good people came back into my life and helped me through, the difficult times. And my first race back on the track, I won, and I continued to win. Mm-hmm. And I won four state titles my senior year.
Yeah.
So but it wasn't expected. I was just thrilled, and so I never really expected anything. I wanted to win, but I didn't feel like it was I could do it, and it was a sure thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of it, isn't it? Expectations in runners are really what bring on that fear of failure. So that definitely makes sense. And as you mentioned, you did have that huge success immediately after you came back after giving birth to Rachel. And one thing I love that I read from you is that you said, even though it was your first race back and you just told us you were really nervous, you said from the get-go, I was there to run my best, do what I could to win. Totally focused on the task at hand, which is wonderful and exactly how someone should be. But I'm just curious, how did you have, especially as a high school runner, that mature of a mindset to just focus on doing your best? And then secondly, how did you, for anyone listening who maybe is going through a struggle of some kind, how did you kind of put that out of your head and not allow those fears and struggles that you're going through to kind of destroy you mentally and have you focusing on the wrong things rather than just doing your best like you ended up doing?
Well, I feel that I was refreshing to step away from all of that, and running gave me that. You just push everything aside. Here I am, I'm running. I'm going to run hard. I'm going to push myself as hard as I can. Or, even on an easy long run, I was getting out there, getting away from it, just kind of purifying my mind in a way. And in a race, it was more like, now I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to just really give it a go. But I truly enjoyed running, and I didn't hurt as badly as I think some of my competitors. And maybe I did. I just didn't realize it. But I didn't find running painful. I didn't find it overly hard. I just found it joyful. And not that I was singing along, skipping along. I was pushing hard, and it was a lot of work, and it was hard work. But it's a chance to just get away from it all.
So good, right? So I just love the way that she is able to just change and channel all the things that have gone wrong in her life and make them into something special. So I hope you appreciated that one. Next is more of a sciencey one. This was one with Andy Jones, who is a professor of applied physiology at the University of Exeter. But his Twitter handle is Andy Beetroot. And you will soon see why if you start to look him up. He is the original researcher who found out about the power of how beets can help us to recover. And he's done a lot of research on it. In addition to other things, he's been a consultant for the Sub 2 Hour project, worked with Paula Radcliffe. And we are going to have a few different areas that we're going to talk about today that you will get to hear from the interview. But I thought maybe this would be interesting to hear about Kipchoge and the way that him and the other Kenyan athletes train together. I just thought this was fascinating and something that only few people have insight with. So over to Andy.
I'd been to Kenya several times before as part of the UK athletics setup because we have an altitude base up in up there at what's it called, I-10. So I'd been there a few times and I'd observed some of the Kenyans training and so on. But it was great to see Kipchoge's camp. And I think the thing that strikes you is how together they all are for a start. It's one big happy camp where there's no it's all for one and one for all kind of thing. Real good mentality about it. Very simple existence, very non-flashy. They train hard. They recover hard. They don't distract themselves with peripheral stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's a very natural and beautiful setting. It's a lovely environment. They get up very early. They start to run before sunrise often. They don't have fantastic facilities, but there's plenty of them. And they work hard and they've got a good spirit about them. And the same is true in Ethiopia as well. There's a bit of a difference. It's a little bit more kind of more aggressive, a little bit more cutthroat, I'd say, in Ethiopia compared to Kenya, where it's really quite sort of serene most of the time. But fascinating, and clearly what they're doing there, they've done well for generations. So there's a lot to learn from it. Some of it is about the simplicity. I think in In Europe and in America, we can get a bit overcomplicated in setting training programs, for example. We obsess over the details. They listen to themselves very well. They listen to the environment. They cut back on things sometimes and they don't feel bad about it. Sometimes if they feel good, they'll push harder. Mm-hmm. One thing that's very distinctive about what they do compared to what I'm used to in the UK at least is that, conventionally, the Sunday long run is one of the slowest runs of the week. So if you go out and you do whatever it is, whatever's appropriate for you, 10 miles, 15 miles, 20, whatever, that tends to be long and slow and relatively easy. And then when you do shorter, steady runs during the week, they'll tend to be a little bit faster. Mm-hmm. And that's flipped on its head somewhat certainly in Kenya and I think in Ethiopia as well to some extent. So that sometimes when they just go out for a steady run, you'd be amazed at how slowly they go.
Yeah. It's like 9-10 minute pace, isn't it, per mile?
Yeah, incredible. However, when they do a long run, let's say it's a 20 miler, it might start slow for the first 2 or 3. I mean, but actually 100 athletes will show up for the start of this long run and it'll start really, really easy, but it gradually accelerates and it becomes a very specific session. Actually, it's one of the hardest sessions of the week, I'd say. And they end up, it's kind of last man standing. It almost becomes a burn up and the top athletes are at the front of that and they're finishing probably 5-minute miling after they've started at 10.
Yep. That's interesting. And I love hearing that because, that's always kind of the same philosophy I've believed in with long runs, that they shouldn't all be that kind of plod along and it's good to hear. And especially also about how easy they take their easy days as well. And then what about, you mentioned, simple life, back off when they need to, go harder when they need to. How does stress come into it? In our Western culture, we're very, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got 100 things to do, I'm so busy, blah, 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 blah. How does that kind of come into it?
It doesn't come into it as the answer. It's so relaxed though. It's great. They come back and they just live a very simple, very humble existence. They're not, watching TV or on video games or on phones. They don't have a huge list of things to do. Mm-hmm. They come back and they shower, and the way they shower is they haul up a well of cold water. A bucket of cold water from a well. They haven't got hot running water at this point. They've got very simple dormitories. I mean, Kipchoge is the elder statesman in the group, shares probably the smallest room in the whole place with the youngest athlete because, they mentor one another. It's fantastic. And they just hang out together. They chat, they chill, they drink tea, and they don't have, I don't think they have a cook come in or a cleaner or anything. They're responsible for doing all of that stuff themselves. So they'll wash out their kit, hang it on, and they'll just unwind. And they have this ability, I think, to switch off from their running. When they're running, they're very serious about it. But when they're not running, and they don't worry about either what the next session is going to be or anything else that might interfere with their ability to recover. So there's a lot to be learned, I think, from the way they go about that.
Amazing, right? You never thought that would be kind of one of the difference makers. It's not something that we consider in our day-to-day lives, and we kind of forget how powerful it can be to train in a group. So I hope you found that interesting. Next up, we have Cara Goucher. This was one of my most popular episodes of the year. Cara is a 2-time Olympian. She was second in the world in the 10,000 meters and is a mother runner. She came back faster than ever after having her son Colt. And we talked a lot about all the rough moments that she has been through. Cara has always been someone who is very honest and open with the running community. She doesn't mind sharing her vulnerability. She admits she is a crier, which I am too. And this was the whole thing was a very powerful conversation. But I thought we would talk in this bit that one of the particularly interesting parts was talking about rough moments, about when things keep going wrong, how you stick in there and keep at it. So let's pass it over to Cara, as she says it way better than I do.
I just think that we all go through really, really bad times. And first of all, just know you are not alone. I've had so many dark moments with running. Even this past year was a struggle. And so, but at the same time, running was always there for me as a release and a way to get rid of that angst. And I know when you're injured and that's taken away, it's so hard, but it will come back. It will come back. And those people will be there for you. Lean on your running friends during those times. They get it. Of all the people, maybe your siblings are why are you so upset because you can't go for a 20-mile run, you know? But they understand that it's like, oh, you don't feel alive. You don't feel like yourself. So lean on those people and just remember, like, the body is a miraculous thing and you will get better. You will get through it. Someday I'm going to write a book about like all of the injuries that I've had and all the times I was told I'd never run again. And you trust me, you can get through it. Lean on your running friends and just believe it just takes one good day to just turn everything around, and just keep holding out for that day.
I just love Cara, and I had a lot of expectations when I was going to be interviewing her. I wasn't really sure what to expect, whether she was going to be standoffish or kind of very professional sounding, but she wasn't. She was just such a sweetheart and such a nice person. She really exceeded my expectations. Next up, let's talk about Dave Collins, who is the chair and director of the Institute of Coaching and Performance. And he was previously the performance director of UK Athletics, which is now British Athletics. And Dave had such fantastic insight into coaching and just how it is not necessarily a case of you're either a good coach or you're not. You have to be able to understand the athlete and what they need, what they appreciate. And he kind of compared athletes and coaches to chefs in the kitchen, and how you can either follow a recipe or you can kind of figure out your own way of making up the meal. And, you know, some people have a talent for understanding what things go with what. And it was just really insightful, and my jaw was on the ground half of the time with this interview. So we're going to pass it over to thank you to David for recommending this part of the interview where he talked about tackling pre-race nerves. I know many of you do tend to get very nervous before a race, so this should be really helpful for you. So let's go listen to Dave Collins.
People think that the pressures on elite level runners are greater, and externally, yes, they are. But internally, I mean, look, I am 17 and a half stone, like actually I'm nowhere near 18 and a half stone. I'm about 260, 270. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm a big unit. I was specialized at sports where I hit people. Yeah. Hopefully didn't get hit too much. When I started doing marathons before they were fashionable, yeah, I was getting nervous because I wanted to do as well as I could.
Yes.
Yeah. And the amount of nervousness that I felt, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, yeah, was exactly the same, I guess, than if I stepped onto a judo mat. So it's a mistake to think that the pressures are greater, because it's what it does to you. So your recreational runners shouldn't feel bad because they feel that pressure. They should go, this is part of it. You know, it's important to you. It's ego involved. I'm happy with that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm so glad you said that as well, because A, no one's ever said that to me, but B, you know, that makes sense. And I'm sure everyone listening is kind of thanking you for bringing that up the way that you did. And so related to that, they get very nervous. They put a lot of expectations, and taking one of those performance, days you really kind of want to see where you're at. Like I have to do this. I have to show I'm in great shape, almost putting a huge amount of pressure on themselves, almost as much as a race, to perform, because otherwise they'll be seen as a failure. What can you say to them listening right now if that is the kind of case where they quite often don't run as well as they should have because they end up putting too much pressure on?
What's the point of the test? The point of the test is to show you where you are. And you are where you are, yeah? If you aren't where you should be, then that's something to worry about. If you're ahead of where you should be, there is rejoicing and dancing in the streets. But if you are where you are, that's great. And what you do is, look, this is. I tend to color code my sessions. Mm-hmm. I mean, I haven't coached much athletics. I've coached a lot of other sports, and I tend to color code my sessions. So I'll have red sessions where we're going, this is a high intensity. I want some performance. Yeah. Right down through amber sessions where we're going, we're ticking through green sessions, which in some of the sports I coach are much more technical development. So I don't expect you to get all happed up because you've got to relax to sort of learn the new techniques that you use. On a red session, I want you on point. Yeah. On a green session, we can take it a bit more chilled and we can work through. And if you get that idea, that for me, an emotional periodization, if that makes sense, mm-hmm. Yeah, which might parallel a physical preparation in the old sort of the old Matveyev and all that sort of stuff mm-hmm. method, for me again makes sense. So I know Saturday I've got a hard run and it's a red session. Yeah. So I want to do what I can do, and that's the way I go. And my preparation for it is important. but that gives me a chance to practice and refine my preparation for races as well. So all in all, this is you're doing this because you enjoy it. You're doing this because it's positive for you. If you're not enjoying it, why the flip are you doing it?
Very true. Very true. And what about if someone is thinking, I'm doing this session. It's kind of, I didn't run as well as I should have, but it was all my mental. I know I'm fitter than that. That's quite a common one that I hear is, that my mind let me down. I mentally gave up.
See, this is there's lots of interesting work that says fatigue is a central thing. It's in the brain, it's not the body. I'm ex-Royal Marines, where I was convinced that I was very, very shattered, but a large PT instructor with a very large boot would mentally prepare me and encourage me to see that I could actually go faster. And by God, I did. I guess it's part of the puzzle. It's why actually I'm a psychologist and not a physiologist, because I'm very into the physiology of it and they're very, very into the science of it. But when push comes to shove, it's the thing between your ears rather than the thing in your chest that's going to determine how well you do. So it's almost, again, if we were to talk, you remember we talked about that blend, that balance, that recipe, and a particular tweak. So you might look at someone and say, actually, as an athlete, you're in superb form, but you underperform in races. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So actually what we need to do is more work on this sort of stuff so that you can achieve what you want to achieve. Or we recognize that you love doing the sport, but you don't particularly enjoy races, in which case I'd probably be going, okay, so relax on races. Yeah, it's all right. It's okay. It's almost giving people the excuse to be what they want to be. But clearly there's a whole lot, and it's several podcasts, I'm afraid, as to what you can do mentally and psychologically with an athlete to help him or her perform.
Okay, next up we have an episode with Alex Hutchinson, who's an award-winning journalist for Outside Online. He's also the author of Endure. He's just very thought-provoking in the topics that he covers. And Alex is actually going to be coming on the podcast again in a few weeks. You will get to hear from him again. But in this episode, we talked about his book Endure and how we learn to push through and dig deep, and also how we learn to deal with pain. This is something that we often end up talking about within the running community, wondering how we can become better at it. And I think this part of the episode with Alex is going to be very important to kind of understand if that is something that you feel is a weakness of yours that you want to work on. So let's pass it over to Alex and see what he has to say. Now, from your research, you kind of talked about, how that is what causes us to slow down. And you talked about the experience thing, how, as you get more and more experience, you are kind of able to learn to push yourself a bit more over time. Now, maybe you could talk about the difference between elites and recreational runners in that aspect and, how experience does come into the ability to kind of push through.
Yeah, this was a really neat. The idea of pain tolerance was a really fascinating area of research. So, and there have been a number of studies, and the basic conclusion is if you compare experienced trained athletes to the general population, they have the same pain sensitivity. So if let's say you start giving people electric shocks that get progressively stronger, everyone on average says, "Hey, that hurts. Stop." Or at least, hey, that hurts at around the same point. It's not that athletes become insensitive to pain, but as the shocks keep getting stronger, the athletes are willing to sit through it for longer before they say, okay, I've had enough. You have, that's all I can handle. So it's not that they learn, or it's not that they get dulled, their sensations get dulled to pain. It's that they learn to deal with the pain. And so first of all, that suggests that this trait isn't something that some people are just born with and others aren't, that it's something you get better with, that everyone gets better with as you start running or continue running and gain more experience. You gradually get better and better at these psychological coping strategies that help you deal with discomfort so that you're able to distract yourself from, instead of focusing on the pain, or you're able to reframe it so that you're experiencing pain and discomfort as a source of information that says you can't continue indefinitely, but you're not about to die. Your legs are not going to fall off and your heart is not going to jump out of your chest. And this is something that the curve is really steep if you take someone who's never run before and they train for a 5K for 6 months, they really learn that, being out of breath is not the end of the world over the course of the first few months. But it's something a learning process that I think continues for a long, long time, for years. You get better and better at just shaving away at that margin of what you're willing to tolerate. And in fact, some of the studies find that in athletes, the pain tolerance, their ability to tolerate not just running pain, but other forms of pain, it rises and falls throughout the season. So they're most pain tolerant before a big race, and they're least pain tolerant during an off season. So it's something that we're always developing and we're always working on, is the ability to kind of hold your finger in the flame of the candle and not pull it back, even though every bit of common sense in your body is saying, hey, you should pull back.
Now, you may remember my next guest in this episode finished, she was a surprise high up finisher at the New York City Marathon, being the second American at the marathon in 2017. She kind of shocked the world when she seemingly appeared out of nowhere. She's now sponsored by Oiselle. If you haven't already guessed, this is Allie Kieffer. And this year she bettered her PR to run a 2:28 in New York City Marathon. Now, in this part of the episode that I'm going to share with you today, we talked about how it felt to jump from a 2:44 to a 2:29 after she initially thought she was done with running for good. We talk a lot about body image and how she changed her mindset to not allow the way that other people look or feel to change the way that she felt, and how even though she is a lot heavier than she was a few years ago when she thought she was at her leanest, she actually is running a lot better now. So if you are someone who struggles with body image, this should be another powerful one for you. Let's get to it with Allie.
So after 2016, the year of running for prize money, in 2017, I just decided I wanted to run for myself because I love running. And I do it because it makes me happy. I enjoy being out there. And so I don't think it was really something that snapped, but kind of just over time and taking ownership of that I'm in control of my mind. And that it's funny, my boyfriend says often someone can't make you feel a certain way. You allow them to.
Yeah.
So just taking that control back, and it's about me. And I've been every size. I've been bigger, I've been smaller. I haven't actually run faster because I was smaller. This season on the track. So, I took 6 months off in the end of 2016 into the beginning of 2017. And then I started running track, and I had some extra weight just because I hadn't really been running. But I was running really well. And then I ended up running the world standard in a 10K, which was a PR for me, but I was heavier than I was when I had run my fastest time before. So it was what is then that's evidence that it doesn't matter what size you are, right? So of course, I'm still self-conscious even to this day. It hasn't completely gone away. If my body type could be like Shalane's, would I want it to? Sure. I just don't think that would be healthy for me. So it's not about looking like everyone else. It's about being healthy, because really running is just part of this lifestyle that I'm living of health.
Yes, exactly. And what would you say to someone listening who maybe isn't sure what their body type is? They maybe have been essentially forcing it into the Shalane kind of body for years, but they know deep down that maybe that hasn't been done in the most healthy way. When you say, you're trying to be healthy, what is it that you mean by that? Just to kind of really reiterate it for someone who feels like they're not sure what their body shape is.
Yeah. So, I think it's pretty simple. You eat mostly vegetables, you eat whole foods, you exercise regularly, you don't drink a lot of alcohol, you don't smoke. It's just actually just being a healthy person, right? And then you'll find a weight that you fit into. I've also logged on my food before, and that drove me crazy, and it makes me just eat more. I just think we overthink how to be a healthy person. What does that mean? And every nutritionist would agree, eat mostly vegetables, eat whole foods, don't eat too much. And I think as Americans, we probably eat too much. Usually our portion size are bigger, but I just think it's a simple equation that we don't need to go overthinking.
Mm-hmm. And do you still allow yourself to have, treats and indulgences? Like what kind of things do you allow to have in? Because, we do have an issue right now with orthorexia. I did talk about this in another podcast episode, which there'll be a link in the show notes for listeners. But, there's been a lot of talk lately that you don't want it to be 100% clean all the time. So what do you allow yourself that, you can show other people that you do eat these foods, even running a 2:29 marathon?
So like desserts and stuff.
Yeah, whatever. That. I mean, chips or whatever your kind of food is.
Anything. If I keep healthy food in the house, if I want something else, I'll just go get it. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of lazy. So I have to be really, really interested in that food to go to the store and get it. But I just don't keep junk food at the house. And dessert in marathon training, I would bake a sweet potato and then put peanut butter and banana and caramelized banana over it. Because it's whole foods, but it was tasty and sweet and satisfying. Mm-hmm. So I think you don't have to say no to anything. I went through a phase where I would worry about what I was going to eat out at a restaurant. What healthy thing could I get at this restaurant?
Yeah.
And so if you can't eat out at a restaurant and if you're having anxiety about going out to eat, you're not healthy.
Yeah.
That's not balanced.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you should be able to do daily activities and not get stressed about them.
We had a lot of science and technical episodes this year, but each of them were solid gold with what they were able to offer. And I'm so thankful that I have managed to get in with a group of some of the top researchers who all kind of appreciate this podcast and appreciate what I'm able to show of these people who never really get any recognition, even though they are kind of the thought leaders and the people changing our running world for the better. Now, I wanted to share this episode with Trent Stellingwerff, who is a sports physiologist and works at the Canadian Sports Institute. Something that we talked about a lot of things in this episode with Trent, including the fact that I don't know if I want to be his friend anymore because he worked at the Nestle factory or Nestle plant in Switzerland, I think it was, for a few years, and he didn't get any Milky Bar, which is the best chocolate ever. So we nearly didn't go on with this interview, which you will hear in the episode. But I thought we would maybe talk about the fact that Trent talked about how we can only really handle two things in our life at one time. Now, I am just as guilty as anyone else of kind of making myself feel like I need to be juggling 100 things at the same time. I need to kind of do more. But he really brought in a powerful point about how our bodies and our minds can only really handle focusing on two things, which isn't easy. And I hate the idea of that because I always have more than two things going on. But I think this will be something that you should be listening to if you are feeling a bit stretched in too many directions and feeling like you can't handle everything that you have going on in your life. So I hope you enjoy this one with Trent, and I definitely recommend going to check it out.
Yeah, I think I had this mythical idea that I could do 3 or 4 or 5 things exceptionally well concurrently.
Yep.
And so when I went to Cornell, and Cornell's a pretty tough school academically, and I was in the pre-med stream and the hard sciences, and I thought, there's no reason why I can't do dean's lists while running absolutely full out and to the highest level of success and actually put in the dedication required for that. One, I didn't really know what was involved there until later, while having a social life and a part-time job. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when I say social life, I absolutely overdid it. At the time, I was like, if I go out 3 or 4 nights a week till 1 or 2 in the morning, I can handle that. And I probably did push that hard for 3 or 4 years of my life. And I had some flashes of brilliance during my career, but it was inconsistent. It was fleeting. I had a fair amount of injuries, a lot of illnesses. And then finally in my 3rd year of university, my back just gave out. I ended up with 2 herniated discs. And I think it was mainly a product of poor lifestyle choices. My family doesn't have a history of back problems. I would sleep where I landed if the party was the night before, and then get up and go. And I had this huge capacity, and I still have a big capacity, but now I just focus it in on a few things rather than thinking I can do everything to the top level. So
what were the lessons learned there? Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah. And to summarize, I try to tell athletes, on any time of the year, you can probably only focus in on two things. And it might be school and running. And then maybe at another time of the year when running's a little less important, maybe then it's school and job or school and girlfriend. But you kind of have to periodize these things throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. And it still kind of is the same, even as you go beyond college and onwards. I know a lot of people listening have full-time jobs. So maybe you can handle, really dedicating to your running and a full-time job. But you probably, if you throw kids in there as well, balancing those three is going to be really tough. So like Trent says, pick two. And sometimes, unfortunately, maybe if you do have kids and a job, then the running is going to have to kind of take a back seat because it's just not possible. And yeah, that's a great lesson to learn and something that we all think we can be the one to be the exception to the rule, but in reality, we can't. So I want to ask you about, that work we mentioned in Nestle at the research center. You were the senior research scientist in sport nutrition, energy, and performance. So tell us, what did your job involve there? What developments were you working on at the time?
Sure, yeah. So the Nestle Research Center is a standalone research institute based in Lausanne, Switzerland. The business headquarters for Nestle was about 20 kilometers, 12 miles away for the U.S. visitors. So the research center had about 600 of us there. It had a real university feel. There was about 50 nationalities there on any given year, so it was very international. It had different departments, just like a university. And the group that I was involved in was called Physical Performance and Mobility. Okay. And so two of us, we looked at physical performance throughout the lifespan. So from children to peak athletes all the way to healthy aging. And mobility meant we also had 5 people in our research group that just focused on bone and bone health. Mm-hmm. I'm not a bone expert at all, but through association of working with them for 5 years, I certainly picked up a lot of that. Mm-hmm. Most of the work that I did specifically was most focused on peak performance, meaning working with a brand like PowerBar to design research, to design in-house research that would be published or collaborative research around the world. So we would also collaborate with a lot of labs like Asker Ukendrup in Birmingham or Louise Burke in Australia as two examples, to just look at the way nutrition and exercise interacted to optimize either adaptation to training or peak performance on race day. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it was a neat time of my life. I learned a lot about how big business works. I was able to create a lot of collaborations and friends throughout that period that I'm still in close contact with. And they're a lot of those people are my mentors now for my own research career.
Mm-hmm. And with just going deeper into that, you said about, working PowerBar and testing and creating, research studies. Is this literally kind of like collecting up subjects, having them, this latest PowerBar or whatever it is product that you had created or someone had created for performance nutrition, testing it out with these people? Like what specifics did you do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, you bet. So some of it was just that. You've nailed it on the head. So sometimes it'd be a new formulation of a gel or a power bar that we were going to fast track and trial on a group of triathletes just to get initial feedback on taste and gastrointestinal tolerance. In other instances, at the time, PowerBar was getting much more into the space of protein, and they wanted to look at protein from a recovery standpoint. So the brand in PowerBar Europe, they have say whey protein products and a lot of other products that are in the US. So in those situations, we might collaborate with a lab and do a full-blown study at a university where there's muscle biopsies and tracers, and we're measuring muscle protein synthesis. And so it's a real combination of things. Probably one of the things that I'm most proud of during that period was very early on, we saw the results on a supplement. It's an amino acid called beta-alanine, which is a high-intensity hydrogen ion buffer used for middle distance type events. And at the time, Professor Roger Harris, he was also the guy that figured out creatine. 15 years earlier, had come out with a couple of studies on beta-alanine. And so I was involved in 2 or 3 studies there, and then the launch of PowerBar beta-alanine, which still exists to this day.
The next episode I want to share with you was a bit of a different one. It wasn't in the traditional sense in that I was kind of interviewing the guest and hearing about their life. It was more of a kind of asking my guest questions that are very typical runner questions that come up often. They are mistakes that we like to make, and we just kind of bounced ideas back and forth off what our answers would be. Now, this is Jason Fitzgerald, who is the owner and founder of Strength Running, which you may have heard of. And many of you, I'm sure, are fans of. And Jason has helpful and actionable advice for runners of every level, but especially for newer runners. We talk a lot about how to avoid injury, how do you know if you're running too fast on your easy days, how to do a warm-up correctly, how to strength train, cramping in races, and all kinds of other things. But I thought this part of the episode would be particularly important, especially if you are someone who does struggle with this during races. So let's pass it over to Jason and hear this part of the episode with him.
So if we're talking about muscle cramps rather than, say, a side stitch, then as far as I understand it, the latest, the research that's coming out is actually showing that muscle cramps are not caused so much by electrolyte imbalances or losing a lot of salt through your sweat, but really because you're trying to do something that your body isn't quite ready to do. And so it's really common in the marathon because the marathon is a really hard event. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people don't appreciate how difficult racing 26.2 miles is. But, if you're cramping at mile 20, I would look at two culprits. Number one is, are you prepared for the distance? So a lot of runners will run 16, 17 miles for their max long run and then wonder why they're cramping at mile 20 in a marathon. I'm one of those coaches that's a firm believer in marathon specific long runs. If you're going to race 26.2 miles and you don't get your long run up to about 20 miles, you're doing yourself a disservice. And I don't think you're going to be ready for the distance.
Even if someone is planning on running like a 5-hour marathon, that 20 miles may take them, 4 hours.
In that case, there are some caveats to this rule, as pretty much any rule in running can be bent or broken. I generally don't like runners to run more than about 3.5 hours for their long runs. So, time on feet is an important metric to track when you're doing long runs, I think. So if your long runs are maxing out at 3.5 hours, I wouldn't go too much more than that because I'm not sure if you're getting any more physiological benefit from running that long. And it is dramatically increasing your injury risk. Being on your feet for that long is much more stressful for your body. And, I would just have the runner cut the run at 3.5 hours.
Okay, so 20 miles or 3.5 hours, whichever comes first.
Yeah, I would. That's a good guideline to use. Definitely.
Okay. So sorry, I interrupted you there. So that was one of the things you would say?
Yes. So number one is making sure that you're prepared for the distance itself. And then the other culprit is making sure that you're prepared for the pace that you're attempting to run. So if you're someone who's trying to run 8-minute pace for a marathon and your first 10 miles were at 7:30 pace, and then you start wondering why you're cramping after the halfway point, the issue is your pacing. So your body has to first be ready for the distance of a marathon. And then second, ready for the pace that you're attempting to run it at. So proper pacing is really critical in the marathon because of this reason, because if you start out too fast, not only are you incurring a lot more muscle damage, but you're burning through fuel a lot faster. And, that's going to contribute to you just hitting the wall later in the race. There's a lot of different reasons why proper pacing is important, but the cramping issue is an important one too. And, if you're just too fast in the early stages of that marathon, you're going to have to slow down later in the race and you're probably going to get some cramps because, your body's just simply not ready for the pace that you're about to run.
Again, if you are someone who is a newer runner into the running world, or you just find yourself tending to get injured a lot or struggling with things like overtraining, then maybe that episode is one you want to go back and check out with Jason Fitzgerald. Again, with all these episodes, if you go to the show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 94, that's 94. You will be able to find links to all of these episodes because they are going to be the ones that I'm going to be talking about today, and you can find the full episode on there. and the number to go with it, because if you are going to subscribe on iTunes, which I hope you already have, if you go subscribe on iTunes, then you will be able to go and find all of those episodes and not have to keep going to the web pages. And by the way, if you do subscribe on iTunes, that is one of the best ways you can show iTunes and Google and the world that you appreciate this podcast. So if you have not already subscribed on iTunes, please go do so. Right, next up, I had an episode with Emily Kraus, who is the clinical assistant professor at Stanford Children's Orthopedic and Sports Medicine Center. That's quite a title. She specializes in physical medicine and rehabilitation. Now, this episode talked a lot about hip and bone health. And for those runners who end up injured a lot, this is going to be something you really need to listen to. I was quite surprised by what she said was the number one thing to keep us healthy. Even though I knew it was important, maybe not quite this important. And we also talked a lot about how your body changes after you have a baby. So if you are someone who is either pregnant right now, planning on getting pregnant, or is postpartum, I would definitely recommend taking a listen to this episode. But let's pass it over to Emily to learn some more.
So full disclosure, I have never been pregnant, never gone through that experience, but I have interacted and heard a lot of stories from mothers and both elite runners, recreational runners who have had babies and have had struggled, especially during those early stages of getting back and that return to running kind of postpartum. And one of the challenges is, during that time of holding that life in your body. I mean, your body is going through a lot of changes, weight gain, appropriate weight gain. Our ligaments are more lax or kind of especially around the pelvis area to allow for that pregnancy to happen and or the delivery to happen. And the time after that, as your body is returning to its kind of normal state, it's often not just this natural snap of a finger and the ligaments are back and everything's in the right position and exactly where you started at from a running standpoint. And trying to rush that and get back to that point too quickly can be pretty harmful. For example, when we talk about kind of postpartum breastfeeding and the kind of that transient load bone density that takes place during that time, there is that risk of if you increase your volume too quickly or that impact activity too quickly, you may kind of run that risk of a stress reaction or stress fracture. We talk about the pelvis, there are a lot of changes that happen on those with those muscles, and specifically after the delivery, those muscles, they maybe have less tone and strength than they had prior to that pregnancy. And the pelvis is a very intricate bone with some very important ligaments, and sometimes those ligaments, as they return to the kind of their normal structure, when they're less lax, they may be a little out of balance, and sometimes they call it pelvic obliquity. And with that, oftentimes requires some additional type of strengthening to prepare your body to get back to its running or whatever the sport may be. So there's a lot of there's a lack of good research on return to sport and return to running postpartum. So it's a challenge. I've been lucky. I picked some brains of some experts in the field, both out of University of Florida, Christine Morgan, Meryl Alapatu, and both of them I would consider really experts in the field and have a wealth of knowledge on what it takes to get an athlete kind of back to that normal prior level. And a lot of it is strength-based. So both kind of pelvic floor strengthening, which isn't in a lot of magazines. Strength and conditioning magazines is not in the headline. How to strengthen your pelvic floor.
Hopefully one day.
Yes, hopefully. I mean, that's really, I think what our goal is, even with this conversation, is to kind of take away that stigma of talking about pelvic pain and that return. And it's not always an easy linear return. You may have a linear for a couple of weeks, and then you may have to plateau and let your body adjust to those changes, and then take a small increase again. And I think being patient with the system, and also respecting that timeline, but also understanding that there's a good chance that an athlete will return to some degree of a competitive, or at least that sense of enjoyment, or that feeling of enjoyment that they get from their sport or from running.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Tina?
Yeah, no, it definitely did. And just, you mentioned the recovery time, or the period that it takes to get your body back to kind of, I don't want to say where it was, but where things kind of back in place how they should be. How long does that take? Like how much grace should a woman give themselves after having a baby?
So I definitely think it's very dependent on the athlete and the patient, or on the athlete, and also what kind of pregnancy they had. If it was vaginal versus a C-section. A C-section is a surgery, and so they need to understand that they need to factor in that post-surgical return. There is some research on, I would say, a small subset of elite athletes that it could be, 4-6 months before that progression begins. But it could be even longer before that kind of elite and that higher performing status can really take place. Mm-hmm. And we kind of talk about that nutrition component too, because especially if an athlete's breastfeeding, you want to make sure that that energy balance is maintained, so that calories in match that energy out, and that the kind of greed of getting back to that sport too quickly doesn't take over to try to get back to a pre-race weight that's kind of unrealistic for the bodily functions that are necessary to kind of keep the runner healthy, but also keep the baby healthy. Yeah. So.
Okay. And we're going to talk about eating and nutrition in just a second. Just one more thing though. Before we move on, we talk, actually, I'm going to ask this afterwards. This is going to tie into another question I'll ask later. Okay. So, going back to nutrition, you said about, how important it is. Just to kind of drill this point home, if you were trying to lose weight, you couldn't shift those last few pounds, you were trying to cut back on calories a little bit. What are some of the implications if you do that, and if you are breastfeeding in particular? What risks are you putting yourself at by underfueling? And is it okay to even do it a little bit?
So, good question. And I will say that there are probably other experts out there that may have even a more scientific explanation to this. But as far as the risks of underfueling and kind of that energy mismatch is what I like to explain. So specifically going into that chronic energy deficit. So a period of time where calories in are not matching energy expenditure. The risk is, well, one, the lactation. If they are lactating, they may not produce as much breast milk for their baby. And there's also the risk of altered bone health. So there is already a risk of potential low bone density, kind of in a transient or temporary phase while breastfeeding. But if that energy mismatch happens, that could lead to an even lower level of hormones, specifically estrogen, which then can pull more, so that kind of prevents bone building or bone formation and actually increases bone breakdown. And so that you're just kind of putting yourself up for an even greater risk of a bone stress injury, a stress reaction, or stress fracture. And other consequences as far as just feeling kind of having low energy, which is not good when you're already not getting enough sleep to put yourself in a greater energy or just fatigue level, and irritability, all of these other components that we think about. And maybe this is the not right time, but I also want to give kind of a plug for this relative energy deficiency in sport, or RED-S, which has, they just came out with a new consensus statement this year on an update, and the realization that low or underfueling can affect all other parts of your body, and all these other physiologic processes, which are important for just normal function in daily life.
The next episode I want to talk about is from a friend of mine, Jared Ward, who was 6th at the 2016 Olympics in the marathon. He's a Saucony athlete, And he is kind of the king of pacing and timing his races right. He's kind of become known for making it to the finish line at just the right time, managing to time it out and just be very successful when he needs to be. Jared is a wonderful, kind person, and I'm sure you're going to love him. And this part of the episode, I thought we would talk about where he talked about during a race, how the way you see your mind and the way you kind of focus in and get ready for the race as the race progresses and unfolds should be like a funnel. It's a really interesting way of thinking about things, and I know a lot of people have found this really helpful and have been using it ever since. So if you have a race coming up anytime this year, this is something you might want to consider. So I hope you enjoy this part of the episode with Jared, and go check out the rest of the interview to learn more. We all know that it is more difficult, just as it is in that cold, windy weather that we talked about. But in the heat of the day, or, when you're trying to run hard and it is getting hotter by the minute, how do you stay strong mentally and not let it kind of defeat you and allow you to kind of give in?
Well, that's hard. And it's hard in the marathon because you're trying to balance these two mindsets of this is a marathon and it's hot and I need to take care of myself and I'm paying attention to how I feel and I'm taking preventative measures early. But then you also want the mindset of at mile 22 to be, I'm tough, I'm going, this is my pace, I can do anything in the world. I don't care how my body feels. And it's hard to balance two mindsets that seem so polarly opposite.
Yeah.
And so what's been beneficial to me is to kind of start, I take my focus in the marathon and I treat it like a funnel. And so at the beginning of the marathon, my focus is very broad, even to noticing what's around me, the beautiful scenery that I'm passing or what the buildings look like. And I'm very in tune with, okay, where am I getting my nutrition? How am I going to make sure that I get enough fluid in me? Where's my next water station? How can I make sure that I don't miss that, or I'm ready to drink as much as possible, or whatever. And so I'm kind of thinking about those things early, but then throughout the race, I'm gradually trying to funnel my focus so that by the time I hit 20 miles or 18 miles or wherever that wall happens, that I'm not still in that mindset of how do I feel? Because if you hit the wall and you're thinking, how do I feel? The answer is going to be, I'm not feeling very good.
To put it lightly.
So at mile 16 or mile 18, you want to be thinking, this is a race. Am I in the right position? How quick am I going? Where's my pace? How are my competitors feeling? What's the right time for a break? Am I ready to push the brake? Things like that. And so by mile 16, I want to be focused. And so I kind of have cues throughout the race, and I've predetermined these, something that I see at 10K that says, all right, I'm 10K in, check off the quarter of the way done or so box, and let's relax and move through this next 10K. And then I'll have something around half marathon where I think, okay, it's time to assess how my competitors are doing. And it's interesting to me that's just something that's worked really well for me in terms of getting me focused, is I start listening to how everyone else is breathing and start paying attention to how the guys around me are moving, and do they look labored or do they look easy? And that just fires my competitive switch, beginning to look at these other runners. And so that kind of starts me into taking myself from this broad focus down into this narrow focus, so that hopefully by the time I'm hitting miles 16, 18, 20, I'm racing. I'm no longer thinking about how I feel. I'm still reaching for water and very aware that I need to be keeping myself hydrated. But by that point, I'm racing. And it doesn't always happen easy. I remember in the Olympics, the leaders broke away at about 15 miles. And I instantly had this feeling of, I don't feel very good. And they were pulling away, running a faster pace than I was prepared to run. And I was still going to run my pace. But all of a sudden, I wasn't in the lead pack anymore.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as fun. And it became hard. And I started to think, what's going to happen if I can't finish this race? You know, my family is here and all these people are watching me at home. All of America is watching me at home. What happens if I can't do this? And that is not positive thinking. No. And I think one of the first things that we need to have in our arsenal is a number of things that we can say to ourselves to get us back into the here and now, focusing on what's in front of us. And I learned in this race, you know, that, and I think I knew this partially before, but I wasn't necessarily worried about how I felt right then at mile 15 or 16. I was thinking about too far ahead in the race. I think one of the things that makes the wall and the marathon so debilitating is we're at mile, say, 16, and that's about how long our glycogen stores can last. So we're running out of carbohydrates. We're switching over to fat stores. Running's not as easy. And there's a little bit of that physical. But then the kicker is when we realize, oh, shoot, we have 10 miles left. You know, how are we going to do this? Mm-hmm. And if the race ended at mile 17, mile 16 wouldn't feel like the wall. Mile 16 would feel great. We'd start kicking it in. But because the race ends at 26, we start worrying about all these things that might happen. Yeah. And I remember in the Olympics thinking, it all of a sudden hit me that I didn't know if I could make it to the finish line at the pace I was running, but I knew I could make it to my next water bottle. So that was all I was going to focus on. And I just focused on me to my next water bottle at 5-minute mile pace. And that's all I did. And I got to the next water bottle and I drank a little and I thought, all right, I don't know what's going to happen the rest of this race, but I know I can make it 2 more miles to my next water bottle. And I think biting off chunks of the race that I can mentally wrap my mind around kind of baited me along. Mm-hmm. And eventually I was back kind of in the race where I was catching guys that were coming off that front pack, and I would look up and say, all right, I'm going to catch the next guy. And then I would catch him and I'd look up and say, all right, I'm going to catch the next guy. And before you know it, I'm on the home stretch running as fast as I can towards that finish line. And it's so rewarding. I think, you know, in the middle of the race, it's hard to remember how rewarding it is to cross the finish line and feel that, I'm going to call it joy of doing something really hard and conquering it. And in the middle of the race, you know, sometimes all you can think about is how much you'd rather be able to snap your fingers and be back home.
Why do I even bother? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Why did I sign up for this thing? Yeah. I'm hardwired. I can't quit, but I wish that I could be anywhere else but here. Those thoughts aren't in the now. And if you can get yourself back to the now and say, okay, what can I do? What do I know I can do? I can relax. I can look up and I can run to that next post or whatever it is and kind of get some momentum going. And it's so rewarding. I think, you know, power statements of it's worth it, or I can do this, or 1 more mile, or something that really resonates with you, store that away and then just use it over and over in that marathon. And I think that can go a long ways.
Okay, let's talk about Chrissie Wellington. She's a 4-time Ironman world champion, and she rose to the top very quickly. She talked a lot about managing expectations, how if you have a big goal that you really want to achieve, what you should do and how you should approach it. And this part of the interview was particularly powerful, so I'm going to pass it straight over to Chrissie because I don't think it needs much of an introduction, so let's get to it. You know, you've talked a lot publicly about, you know, you doing well in the early days with no expectations. And so what would you like to say to someone listening who is maybe in that time right now where they're really working hard towards a goal, they want to be their absolute best? How do you keep that pressure off? Because you know, being on top for so long and so many championship years, how did you manage to keep that pressure off? Because if you can do it, then other people can do it at their various levels.
Psychological strength, or you know, training your mind is as important as training your body. And at any level, like you said, whether you're taking your first steps or whether you're world champion, there's a pressure that's associated, especially with racing. And that pressure comes from the investment of time and energy and the desire to do your very, very best and you know, reap the rewards of months and years of investment. And that's no different for me than it is for you or anyone else standing on a sideline. We've all invested time and energy in trying to reach our goal. It's very, very important to us. So I think I experience the same butterflies, the same nerves, the same apprehensions as anyone else. But there are strategies that you can use to try and quell some of those nerves whilst accepting that they're there and accepting that they're also beneficial, because they're a sign that you care. They're a sign that you have invested. So first and foremost, I remember that the nerves and the butterflies will fly away as soon as the gun goes off. Mm-hmm. So I will feel nervous before an event, but I know, experience tells me that those nerves will dissipate because you're so focused at the start of a triathlon and the swim and getting your head down and finding your position and, you know, getting on the feet of someone faster than you, that you've forgotten about being nervous. You're in the race, you're in the moment, you're executing. So the nerves do go, and I try and remember that. I focus on what I have done in terms of my preparation rather than what I haven't done. It's very easy as you near a race to think, I missed that session, I wasn't very well, I don't feel well, I've got a niggle in my left leg, you know, John or Julie next to me has done this and that and the other, or they look great and they've got a six-pack and I haven't. It's very easy to worry about what you haven't got, what you haven't done, or what other people have in relation to you. Try and focus on what you have done, what you have managed to invest. You have done the best you can in the context of your life to be on that start line. You can do no more. And I always try and remember that. In terms of kind of practical steps, visualization is really important to me. So just taking myself off, being somewhere quiet in the days preceding a race, or even try and get somewhere quiet race morning, maybe a porta potty or something. Where
that is often, isn't it? That's where you end up. I find myself sitting there going, you can do this. You're really like, that's the only place you can go sometimes.
Although it's not the most pleasant of environments. But just take yourself to a place where you can just try and do some breathing exercises, get some positive images flowing, or, you know, even if it works for you, sit with someone and talk to someone that you really care about that can, you know, just encourage and motivate you. I prefer to be on my own before a race, but others might like the company of other people. But before the race, it's not for race morning, but in the days preceding the race, I also visualize things that might go wrong. It sounds really negative, but I think that if I thought about them, I've got this strategy that I can deal with them. So what happens if my goggles get knocked off? Mm-hmm. What happens if I drop my nutrition? What happens if I get a cramp? What would I do to address the problem? And I think that gives me a bit of peace of mind.
Or even could you know, even if you don't have to think of all the different ones, if you envision something going wrong and then you overcoming it, because we all know that those perfect races rarely happen. But if you envision something going wrong and you making it through the other side and being like, okay, well, that happened, but I'm getting on with it, and see yourself kind of successfully continuing, then that it's more realistic in your mind. So
absolutely. And that includes remembering previous races. Mm-hmm. If you have done previous races, it might just be your first race. But if you've done previous races, you'll know that a race never goes perfectly. Not for me, not for anyone else. It never goes perfectly, especially not in an Ironman distance race. So think about times in training and times in a race where things haven't gone perfectly and where you've endured and where you've overcome, because that's really, really powerful. And lastly, it's very, very hard when you've invested so much, me included, but try and keep perspective. There will be races, unfortunately, where we don't reach our outcome goals, where we don't reach a time or a position that we might want. But the world doesn't end. We're still the same people. Our children, our sisters, our brothers, our mothers, our fathers, they still love us. we've still gone through the process of getting there, and that in itself is an achievement. So I always try and keep perspective.
Yeah.
And know that good days, bad days are all stepping stones. They're all kind of successes in their own way.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast the other day with Tony Robbins, and he was saying you're either winning or learning, which I thought was really cool.
That's a really nice way of putting it. I'm a fan of Rudyard Kipling's poem If, and it says treat triumph and disaster as the same thing, essentially. Mm-hmm. Winning or losing, ultimately they're both learning experiences for us all. And it doesn't seem like that, and it's so cliched, but one of my most treasured victories came after a huge disappointment. And I wouldn't have had that victory had that disappointment not have happened to me.
We had a lot of tough women on the podcast this year. There was a lot of women who just inspiring for one reason or another, for the way that they approach their life, the way that they approach their training, and just their fearlessness. And none of them embody this as much as Chau Smith, who was on the show to talk about the 8 marathons she did in 8 days for her 70th birthday. And this was one tough woman. Now, if you have been feeling a little bit sorry for yourself, or you need a bit of a perspective change, just listen to this part of the episode and you will change your mind immediately. This is just amazing. And I think about this woman often, and just how tough she is and how she just gets on with things, no matter how difficult they may seem. So let's get to Chau.
When I fell, and so we made to Amsterdam, and that morning we walked out the garage to get in the van to go to our race, and everybody's so much taller than me. They in front of me, and when they got out of past the door from the hotel and the big door stopper, I just stepped right on and land on the concrete, and just bleeding in my lip, cut in my lip, and took off the skin on my right leg. That's where I have 2 pieces of shrapnel, swollen so badly. So the first thing I say, oh my God, I don't want anything happen to me. I have to go to the hospital, and I slow down my group. That's the first thing I worry about them. But I get up and brush up the dirt and get in the van. Well, good thing that the weather was really cold there, below freezing when we started. So I wore my long pants. I covered my face so they didn't see my swollen lip. And also ran around the pond 5 times, and La Walker and run around there. And they have another race that we run with, and Lala Walker and I were bleeding so bad in my mouth, and I don't want to spit out while I'm running because, not like I'm very sensitive. I always try to I don't want to make all Asian look bad. If I split the blood out while I'm running, I swallow my own blood. Because I don't want people to say, oh my God, do you see that Asian woman spit out blood everywhere? Something wrong with her. So I don't want that. So I swallow my own blood the whole time. And finally, my group saw when we got back after the race, my lip was swollen that day, all black and blue. But I still didn't tell them my leg, and I took picture of my leg, and I share in the 888 website. It's swollen really bad, and I still ran the rest of 4 more marathon without share that with anyone at all.
So why then did you not tell the group after that race, letting them know that you did hurt yourself? Was it what you were worried they were going to suggest you didn't do the remaining 3?
Not only that, I'm sure they will thinking of you have to do the half marathon. Mm-hmm. But that's why I try harder yet to run to finish. I want to tell them that don't ever tell me to do half marathon. But I don't want them to worry about me with my swollen leg. Mm-hmm. Say, oh my God, before that, we worry about her. Now she injured her leg. And that's why I wait till after we complete and come back to the United States. And I showed them my sunburn was so terrible. My neck, my back, my arm, because going through the security, they must thought out my sunscreen cream. And so I didn't ask anyone for sunscreen. And my very first race, when I finished with 102 degrees, I got sunburned so badly that anytime I pull up my backpack, I just want to scream, but I wouldn't share with anyone at all. Sunburn, my legs, bleeding lip, and so I would wait until I came back and I share all that picture, and they say, oh my God. I say, you guys remember, I always followed you in the back, and you always had to look back and say, where's Chau? But I would try to walk normal as I could, so they didn't know that I was limping because my knee was swollen. So I able to hidden from them all that the whole trip.
And what did they say when you finally told them?
They were surprised. They say, I cannot believe, Chau, you the something else. You the toughest person I ever know.
Pretty amazing, huh? Okay, next was definitely one of my favorites. Now, I really mean this. Dean Karnazes was someone I did not expect to like. To be honest with you, I thought he was going to be very kind of professional and have his answers kind of cookie cutted out, and he wouldn't even really think about what I was saying. He would just go on autopilot. He is, of course, ultramarathon man, has run up to 350 miles in one go, run 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days, but he is here to talk about his book, Road to Sparta, and his most recent adventure, if you want to call it that, which was his toughest one of all. Now, Dean's had thousands of interviews, but I could not believe how real he was with us. He talked about how he was hounded by the media, how he didn't eat in the final 75 miles of his 153 miles, and just how much that affected him, and why, with bathroom issues kind of plaguing him. And you will hear that bathroom stuff doesn't just happen to new runners. Dean talked about this in detail and just how much it set him back. So this was by far one of my favorites that I've ever done. And I hope you will go back to listen to this one, because it was just great, and by someone who is just absolutely kind of almost a celebrity worldwide. It was just great to hear him being so real with us, and we were really lucky to get him to be that real. So enjoy this one.
The problem is that I would go out for 6 or 8 hour training runs eating only figs, and it was fine. Mm-hmm. But I didn't ever run for 24 hours only eating figs, and there's a big difference. I mean, why do you eat figs typically? A lot of figs is because, you're not regular and you want to become regular. Well, when you're running an ultramarathon, you don't necessarily want to be regular because, and, when things started happening with my guts, that's kind of a death spiral.
Yeah.
Once you lose your guts like that, it's hard to recover. And I knew that. And, it was very tempting for me to just grab an energy bar or something else other than another fig or another olive. And, that pretty soon the olives, I just couldn't, that was just too heavy of a taste. The cured meat, it was just like chewing on a leather belt. Mm-hmm. I just couldn't get any moisture in my mouth. And I don't know what, I just got this idea that just keep, I just thought, you're either gonna end up on a stretcher in the medic tent, or you're gonna finish this darn race. I mean, I was that determined, and I just felt like if I put something in my mouth, it's gonna go right through me. So don't even bother. Just deal with it. Drink water, and keep putting one foot in front of the other.
And somehow you did just that. And, we're going to talk more about towards the end there, just how much you were struggling and how far your body went to be able to get to that point where you could do it. But something else that caught my eye in the book was you talked about at Corinth being kind of essentially blasted with media attention, people wanting autographs, cameras being shoved in your face. And this also happened at the end after 35 hours of running. Now, being that you were once voted one of the top 100 most influential people in the world, it's not really surprising. But you talked in the book about kind of at those points, you were doing it mindlessly. You were just smiling, signing, kind of just essentially getting through it. So for someone listening, myself included, wondering, what does it feel like to be that famous that people are just all around you all the time? I'd love for you to be real with us. You see it as like your duty as what you do, but does any part of you wish that you could just get on with, your stuff in peace?
That's a really good question. And I know for so many of you listening to this, it's hard to relate to, what you just explained and what I'll talk about, because it's very unique to kind of the Dean experience, if you will. But especially in Greece, I'm kind of a known entity, and I have a lot of fans and followers, a lot of relatives, and they came out in force to see me along the route on the Spartathlon. And when I say see me, I mean these are people that I'm related to, but I've maybe never met my whole life, and they feel an intimate bond with me, and they bring out their whole family. And a lot of them were not runners, let alone ultra marathoners, so they don't know what it feels like to run for 75 miles and be swarmed by a group of people all wanting, to meet you, to take a selfie. Yeah. A lot of them had copies of my book they wanted me to sign. And, I come running into an aid station and I'm shot. I mean, I'm exhausted. I've been running for 75 miles nonstop. All I want to do is get in my own head, just sit there and regroup, maybe try to get some food in me. And that was just not happening. I would show up and there'd be, 30, 40 people wanting to see me. And a lot of these people had come. I mean, some people were saying, wow, I came from this island to see you. I've been traveling since yesterday. And what do you say to someone like that? Even though, you're exhausted and you really don't feel like talking to anyone at that particular moment, you're almost kind of happy to see them. I mean, it's this kind of reunion. So it was very conflicted experience. I so wanted just to get in my own head, and what I ended up doing at these aid stations, just giving myself to the people and, taking selfies and signing stuff, not taking care of myself. And then finally just getting so overwhelmed, by all this attention, just getting up and saying, hey, I got to go. Thank you for being here, and just continue running, not tending to myself at all. And that was kind of, the situation I was in. And I know it's so hard for so many people listening to relate to that, but I should say there was a camera crew, and there is a movie now called The Road to Sparta, and they actually captured very well. They captured me coming in these aid stations and just being swarmed, and just leaving without really tending to myself at all.
You enjoying these cool mornings? How about the intense workouts that are just as hard as they always were? I don't know about you, but I always feel like workouts are going to be somehow easy in the fall after a hot summer, but they're still, hard. I still feel beaten up after hard days and after long runs, and I still get sore the next day, but less sore when I have Body Health Perfect Amino to speed up the recovery process. I take a lot of comfort knowing that it is working hard to repair my muscles as soon as I stop running or strength training. Then I can eat my meal, my usual 25 minutes later to fuel up again. I wish I could say I used that time to stretch, foam roll, do mobility and rehab, but let's be realistic. That doesn't always happen. Usually I'm jumping in the shower and trying to get clothes on before Bailey starts crying, or I have to do something else on my list. At least I know Body Health Perfect Amino has my back right from the stop of my watch. If you don't believe me, you can try Body Health Perfect Amino with 100% money back guarantee. So if you don't like it or you can't see a difference, you can get your money back. Use coupon code TINA10 for 10% off everything at bodyhealth.com. And if you aren't a fan of the tablets, they also have Perfect Amino XP powder, and there's a new mixed berry flavor to try. Remember, code TINA10 will get you 10% off at bodyhealth.com. The second sponsor today is me. I wanted to tell you about my Overcoming Amenorrhea book, which is coming out on the 21st of January 2019. I have worked really hard to get this finished, get it edited, get it looking pretty nice and ready for your consumption, I guess. And it's mostly covering my story of what I kind of went through, as many of you found me through my story of overcoming amenorrhea, but many of you have asked me about it or continue to ask. I still get regular emails and messages almost on a daily basis as to what I did, just some advice, how I felt. And I thought it would be good to have everything in one place so that you could know my entire story about this situation, not my life story, I promise you. My story about this situation and how I overcame it, all the things that I did, all the things that I needed to keep in mind, and you need to keep in mind. So if you or someone that you know is working on overcoming amenorrhea, I hope you will consider getting this. The more purchases I can get within that first week of launch, the better. That's really going to help me get out there as considered a bestseller author, and I would really appreciate any help you can give me. If you want to be a part of my pre-launch team, send me an email, tina@tinamuir.com, and I will give you more information. But the amenorrhea book will be coming out January 21st. I hope you will support me and get it then. From someone who was very real and very fun with us and just kind of has a great positive perspective on life, the next one we talked to was Matt Davis, who is the founder of Obstacle Racing Media. Now, this episode was primarily focused on depression, which is a serious topic, and we've never really gone into it, but Matt had great advice. It is something he struggles with, which is bipolar depression. And he talked about, waiting for someone to fix him, how it wasn't necessarily that he was getting bad advice from friends or people were telling him the wrong thing, but actually it was that he was waiting for others to kind of do something about it when really it was him that needed to make the change. And if you are someone who has been struggling with feeling down on yourself, or you think you might be depressed, this episode is a must listen. And even though it is about depression, it's not totally sad. There are a lot of laughs in this episode. And I want to thank Mike for suggesting to add this one in here, because that was a great suggestion. And this episode is definitely one I'm referring people to often because it's just something we all need to listen to. So let's hear from Matt and then get on with the episode.
Dude, trust me, it's super hard. It's really hard to watch somebody struggle. And you just reminded me of the most important piece that made the shift for me. If someone's listening that's struggling, is when I went to the treatment place and I was in one of the classes, the case manager lady, you're in a group of people, and she said to somebody else, not even to me, she said, "How are you contributing to your illness today?" And I heard that, and what I heard was, how am I contributing to my recovery today? Because I wasn't. At that moment, I was waiting for something to fix me. I was waiting for the medicine. I was waiting for God. I was waiting for my wife. Like somebody else was going to make me feel better. And the only way out is through, and I was the only one that was going to make me better. And when that, I wasn't ready to hear that before maybe, but I was. And so that plus meds, plus exercise, plus, they talk about, when you're in these places, they say, okay, what can you do? What works for you? And some people are like, well, I like to go for walks. Great. Me just playing with my kids. You got to stay on top of that stuff before you get there, because then when you get there, it's kind of too late. Like you can go for a run or whatever. Like, I mean, I don't know about you, but like, do you find like if you've been super cranky because you haven't run in 2 days?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Or if it's not necessarily if I haven't run in 2 days because I went 3 months without it. But if something stops me that I didn't have any control over, then yes.
Something stops you, like,
or like what? Something happened and I couldn't get out to run, or I was injured, like I didn't have the control over the situation.
Right.
So
it's really tough, to watch someone struggle. I totally get that, because we want to make them better, like so bad. But yeah, you got to just, give them a hug and let them know you're there, and then let them, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You can suggest things. I mean, like I said, so the funniest thing I talk about is like when I came out, my message box blew up and I got all kinds of recommendations, right? Have you tried this meditation app? Have you tried this book? Right. But then I had people who said, you know, Matt, all you need is Jesus. And that was not the answer I wanted to hear or needed to hear, because Jesus isn't the answer for me. But, you know, whatever, they were coming from a good place. So what are you going to do?
All right, just a few more now, starting with my dear friend, Sarah Crouch, who is a 2:32 marathoner. She was the first American at Chicago Marathon this year. And Sarah and I had it was very conversational, as much as all my episodes are. This one, I didn't even give her an intro. I just called her up on the phone and she answered and we began the recording. So you really got to hear the conversation between two friends. And we talked about her struggle with her running career versus the need or want to start a family, how she hadn't run a PR in 4 years and how she kept going, pushing on and wanting to be the best that she could, even despite that. And we talked about her being first American at Chicago and how she really felt about it. There's quite a long section for this interview, but I think this is really important. And I think many people I know resonated with this and said it was one of their favorite episodes ever. So let's listen to Sarah and you can hear more there. You had one side of you that was like, I'm first American. This is something I never dreamed of. Like, it's amazing. But then you also had the other side of it that was like, oh, I kind of thought I was, ready. So what was your thoughts around that?
You know, I always like to, if I go back down to a finish line after I race and I watch people finish the marathon, which I do often, those barriers that roll around on the clock, the 3-hour barrier, 3:30, 4-hour barrier. If you watch carefully, the first few people that come in over that barrier, like 3 hours and 5 seconds, there's people who finish just over that barrier and you see them and you see the elation of the people that finish 10 seconds ahead of them under the barrier. And then the total dejection of the people who finish just over it, when really, there's not a nickel's worth of difference physiologically between running 2:59:55 and 3 hours flat in 5 seconds. It's the same thing. The barrier is just there as this really arbitrary time that you either get to say you beat or you don't. And so for me, I've been chasing a very specific barrier of 2:30 in the marathon, which right now I'm about, 2 minutes and change away, or I would say roughly 5 seconds a mile, which is just heartbreaking when I think about it that way. But at the same time, there's nothing that running owes me. And it's started to sink in that I may not break 2:30 in my career. That's a very real possibility. I have to believe that my best days are ahead of me and that I'm going to, but nothing is guaranteed. And so I don't want to look back on my career and be like, wow, I didn't celebrate all of these really amazing, wonderful, fast marathons because I was so preoccupied with this arbitrary number that really doesn't mean anything. I would love to do it someday, but I've started to get the feeling that it's going to come when I let go of it. The same way that that happiness can be at times when you stop chasing something so wholeheartedly and just let it kind of settle on you. So that's why I'm going to double back and run the California International Marathon. And I honestly haven't decided yet, but I might run it without a watch just for the sake of purely racing a marathon and see where that falls time-wise. And even if that's not sub 2:30, if my goal is to win, then I think I'll be, happy if I place well, happy if I'm able to, perform in such a way that I cross the finish line with nothing left. But running is all about finding this balance between hunger to improve and celebration over the smaller victories. And I think it's hard. We've discussed this a lot in detail for both of us to celebrate the victories when they come along, because we're so hungry for the next step. Even when we have, like in your case, what was it, like 4-minute PRs at a time in the marathon over and over and over. Like, that's huge at the level that you race at. When you're running that fast, like 4 minutes is a long, long time. So you always want to be able to celebrate that without being too disappointed, but then you have to be willing to let that hunger settle in again for the next big thing. And that's what I've been struggling to find the balance with lately. Yeah. And I think that's good for other people to hear you say that you also struggle with that, because everyone listening has at some point struggled with that. I've obviously struggled with it, and we all do, but we never really talk about it because it's just kind of
you kind of get caught up in your own mind about what is next. And you mentioned you might not wear a watch. What was the race recently where you didn't wear a watch? Was it your half or was it the 25K?
It was the 25K. It was the US Championships. And I hadn't, well, you know this, but I hadn't PR'd in a really long time. And I had decided that I was getting so caught up in staring at my splits during a race. And when I would start to fall off a little bit time-wise, I would just panic, shut down, the race would be over. And so I had run several half marathons that were light years slower than what I should be running. I should have beaten myself by a mile to those finish lines. And I was just so fed up. I was so sick of that gosh darn watch that probably 10 minutes before the start, I took it off and I just dropped it in my backpack and I was like, I'm done. And that day I had a breakthrough, the likes of which I hadn't seen in 4 years. And that is what kind of kickstarted my, spring, summer, and fall of racing that has been more successful than any I've seen in my entire career.
But did you put your watch back on for your half and then this one?
I had the watch on for the half, but mostly because I forgot to take it off because the bus that was there to take us to the starting line was 30 minutes late. So we show up to the starting line 20 minutes before the race starts, barely got in a warm-up jog. I end up behind the starting line trying to find a bush to go to the bathroom in. I hop back to the starting line. There's like 30 seconds and I look down and I'm like, oh, I still have my watch on. I was like, well, who cares? I only looked at it, I would say once or twice, kind of the way that you were in CIM where you checked it at 10K, you checked it. I think you checked it at half. No, you didn't check it at halfway.
It was I think 1 mile and then half and then 10K. Yeah. Right. I don't look after 10K.
Yeah, I actually checked it because I was feeling so bad around 8 miles of that race that I was like, if you run a 10-mile PR, you can drop out. You can pull to the side. And I checked it and I missed my 10-mile PR by 4 seconds. So I was like, dang it, I got to keep going. So I did use it. And then also again around mile 12, or I guess it was mile 11, when the woman I was running with dropped me like a ton of bricks. So I was like, oh no, I must be running a 6-minute mile, but it was still 5:25. She just had threw down the hammer in an unreal way,
And so, you've just said there that you probably wouldn't have worn your watch. Why? And then Chicago, you didn't have it on again?
I did have it on specifically for the sake, not to monitor how fast I was going, or I would guess to monitor that I didn't slow down, but to monitor that I didn't go too fast in the early stages. Okay. I would say I checked it at halfway and then I ignored it pretty much for the rest of the race.
Okay, so you've already got yourself in the right mindset to let go.
It took completely taking off the watch for the 25K to do that. But I think that a lot of runners have an unhealthy relationship with the watch, which is another thing we've talked about, this obsession with technology, particularly things like heart rate and cadence, and people running a race where in the last mile, they're like, oh, it looks like my heart rate's a little high. I should slow down. Heck no, you should be racing your guts out and trying to beat the people around you, not letting a machine tell you how fast to run. So I think if you can build a healthy relationship, and I should mention my watch it's a Timex. It's not a GPS watch, which especially at a lot of races in urban cities, you might as well throw your GPS watch away because it's not going to be accurate under the buildings. Mm-hmm. So yeah, as long as you can have a healthy relationship with your watch, which I've finally gotten back to, I think it's okay. But if I ever find myself in a situation where I feel like the watch is slowing me down, I will not use it for a race.
Well, that's good to know. And that I've always been a huge fan of not looking at watches, and it's been good for me to hear you say that as well. All right, so let's talk about a few weeks before the race. You called me telling me about a tumor you had in your leg, which you mentioned earlier. Now, when you called me, it was hard for me to know what to say when you kind of said what you did. And I'd love, well, not love, but I would like for you to tell the listeners of what happened there, if they don't know, and, how did you move on from it and end up racing just a few weeks later?
Yeah, so we had the 2 phone calls that really stick out to me are the one that I called you directly after they found the tumor, which I was... oh man, I was under the impression that it was a knot in my muscle that had been causing all of this quad pain until finally I was with a physical therapist and starting to actually palpate it and realizing, oh, you can actually move it around. It's mobile. It's very hard to explain what it feels like, but almost not the little marbles, but how some marbles are a little bit bigger. They're almost the size of it was like a gumball that you could kind of feel and move around. And so after I found it, knew what it was, I called you and I was like, I don't know what to do. And right away you were like, get it out. You're like, your health is more important than your running. Get it out. You have to get it out. Because at that point, I didn't know that if I wanted to. So I decided to get it out, went in to see a surgeon, and the woman I went in to see, she told me that she wasn't comfortable operating on it because it was too deep. And so she brought in another surgeon who had a little more experience. And he was like, look, I can take it out, but we need to be very clear on the risks. And he was like, I think you don't realize how deep the tumor is. It is quite possibly embedded in your muscle. It might be wrapped around nerves. And if I take it out, I could do a lot more damage than good. So I kind of knew the risk and reward. And basically the risk was, if I don't get it out, I knew I could probably run Chicago, but I would be in pain and I would probably have to drop out the way I did at the 20K versus getting it out and running the risk of not being able to run anymore, or getting it out and it was pain-free and I'm able to do it. So I called you after my appointment and I was walking through the grocery store and I remember it's weird how some things stick out to you. I was like staring at like these bags of rice on the shelf as I talked to you. And I could just see like the details of like, oh, this is sushi rice and this is this rice, jasmine rice, as I'm just like staring at these bags of rice, talking to you. And the words you said, I will never forget, because you were like, listen, you're like, okay, you're going to go through with the surgery. We both know that. So you were like, what you need to do is this. First thing you need to do is you need to write about it, because that's how you process things. Because I told you, I was like, I don't know if I want to share this. And you're like, but you need to, because this is how you deal. Like, this is how your brain works. And then the second thing you told me was like, look, tomorrow morning before the surgery, go for a run somewhere really beautiful and let yourself feel what it feels like to have this surreal moment of not knowing if you're going to be able to run again. Because whether you are able to run pain-free for the rest of your career or whether you're done, this whole window is short. Mm-hmm. Like, whether I have another 10 years in this or not, this is a very, very short window. And beyond that, life in and of itself is short. So taking full advantage of a moment like this and letting that feeling hit you like a Mack truck rather than hiding from it can actually be really valuable as an experience, as a human experience. So that's exactly what I did. And I felt so much better once I talked to you about it. And I think as of that moment, when I hung up the phone, I went about my shopping and I just had a sense of peace. And the next morning, that's exactly what I did. I ran. And the thing that kept coming to mind was not all the things not the PRs and the victories and all that, but just the beautiful bonding moments I've had with the people I've shared my career with, you included, the women and men I've been able to have as training partners, and the people who have just embraced my career and supported me and lifted me up, and how wonderful it's been for the last 15 years. And so I walked into the office for the surgery just feeling at peace with whatever the outcome was going to be, because it couldn't take away these last 15 years where I have lived in a way that I don't think most of the population does in their entire life. Mm-hmm. I've experienced more than a lot of people do in a lifetime. And I'm super grateful for that. Even still, that attitude has not left me.
That's so cool. And did you take that into Chicago? Like, were there moments in the race where you were like, this could have not been happening right now? Like, I'm here. And did you think about it often?
Yeah. Because for me, I felt really, really good up to like mile 21 or 22. And when it started to hurt, I actually reached down and touched the bandage that was still covering the incision site. Cause she asked me, the woman who was prepping the leg afterwards and who took the stitches out, she's like, you'll probably need the bandage on for another week. And I got the stitches out 5 days before Chicago. So I had this bandage on and I just reached down. I was like, okay, this next 20 minutes is going to be quite possibly the worst 20 minutes of, that I'm going to endure for a long time, but remember that you're lucky to be here. And so that to me, the whole weekend, most years I've gotten to Chicago and I sit in my hotel room and I'm miserable and I'm dreading what is to come. And I'm like, I'd rather be anywhere on planet Earth than right here about to race a marathon, because I'm so nervous and I'm so scared of how badly it's going to hurt. I did not feel that this year. I was like, I'm so fortunate to be able to line up, so that just this sense of gratitude settled over the entire weekend. And I know that certainly helped with the race.
Now, in December, we had so many powerful episodes. I was so excited to interview not just Siri Lindley, who was the world champion in the triathlon, recognized by the one and only Tony Robbins for just how amazing she is. But this episode was such a feel-good episode, and it was one that I think I know I will be going back to over and over again. I could barely believe Siri said yes to this episode. And if this doesn't leave you feeling positive about your 2019, feeling like you can be a better person, Siri is just so inspiring. And she talked about her journey from finishing near last in a race to ending up as world champion. It is truly inspiring, and you will see why. So let's turn it straight over to Siri. Once you got into the trials for the Olympics, you threw yourself all in. You know, you got yourself an altitude tent, you visualized every day, which when I heard you talking about this, I thought, wow, this is me, because I've done visualization for, 6-8 weeks before like a big race, and I found it really effective. But you talked about the other side of it, which is where if you get too caught up in it has to happen this way, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then one thing goes wrong and it all comes crumbling down because now your visualization is just off. So I want you to talk to people about, where's the balance between going all in, as you did right there, giving it your all, visualizing every day, but then finding balance, not getting too dedicated so that you lose touch with everything else. How can people find a balance with that? Because I think within our sport and within triathlon, especially, people feel like they want to achieve something big, and the harder they try, the more they commit, the more likely it is to happen. What would you say to that?
That's such a great question, and I'll handle that in two pieces. As far as the visualization, so for 365 days leading into that race, I had visualized the perfect race. And the major lesson I got from this, because the race started, the gun went off, and within the first 2 minutes, everything was going wrong. And I had only visualized the perfect race. So I completely choked. I mean, I was going as hard as I could, but I wasn't even moving. I just kept getting passed and falling further and further back behind. So the lesson here for me, and I share this with my athletes, of course, is visualization is so very powerful. But within that visualization, we need to visualize things going wrong and handling them with grace and fixing the problem. Okay, I get a flat tire, so I'm calm, I'm relaxed. I quickly fix a tire. I get back on the bike. I've had a chance to have a drink, and I take off and I feel better than ever. And I start riding hard and I make my way to the front, whatever. Or, you lose your nutrition in the marathon. And, but I remind myself I have everything I need inside of me. I've had this happen before. I know I can get through it. So it's a matter of visualizing everything going right, but also visualizing any potential things that could go wrong. And in your mind, seeing yourself executing a solution that sees you overcoming that struggle, that problem, whatever it is, and finishing the race, the best that you can.
I just want to add one thing in there. Another element I add to that, just for anyone listening, is to kind of then envision yourself saying, well, look, you made it through that part. You did okay. That could have held you back right there, but you didn't let it stop you. And imagine yourself kind of saying to yourself, well, I made it through that tough patch. And keep going.
And what can I do now?
Yeah.
What can I do now in this moment to make this best race that I can? So that was the big lesson there. But the other thing going into that Olympic trials is I had this thing, and I'm sure a lot of athletes can relate. I felt like I need to do this on my own. Like, if I can do this on my own, then I'm going to be that much stronger, that much more powerful. So I moved out to Australia. I didn't let my family come visit. I lived like a monk. I'd go to bed at like 6 in my altitude tent. And I'm a lover. Like, I love my family and my friends. I love connection. I love bonding. I love animals. And I literally was like stripping myself away from everything that gave me life, everything that filled my soul, everything that rejuvenated me. I was pushing away. And so through that race as well, I rediscovered the strength and the power and the beauty of your team, whether that's your partner, your parents, or your dog that you run with, or your trainer that works on you, whatever it is. Don't ever underestimate how very important your team is, no matter how small your team is or how big. And that was another aspect. that was very important to me that I made the mistake of there. Mm-hmm. And lastly, I think one of the most powerful lessons I got from that day, because I completely choked. I pulled out of the race. I quit. It makes me understand now that not finishing is way worse than coming in last place. But a lot of people, I was kind of meant to make the Olympic team. You know, I was like the second ranked American, and everyone would come up and be like, "Are you sick? Did you have a flat tire? Was something wrong with your bike?" And I could have very easily come up with an excuse. And I can remember in that moment thinking, I can come up with an excuse, but this moment is going to change the future of what I can accomplish in this sport. I need to own it. And so my answer that came out was I choked. I absolutely choked. I had, you know, these expectations that were of the perfect race. And as soon as one thing went wrong, I didn't know how to handle it. And I completely choked. And owning that yourself is so incredibly powerful, because it allows you to develop a respect for yourself. Mm-hmm. And it also determines your capacity to grow and to develop through the sport, mentally, emotionally, everything. The minute you come up with an excuse, you're stunting your growth. You're stunting what you learn from what happened on that day. Whether we place blame, it's my coach's fault, they trained me too hard, or it's my husband's fault, he made me a crappy pre-race dinner, whatever it is, like blame gets you nowhere. Ownership gives you a deeper respect for yourself, and also truly sets you on a path where you're going to learn and grow from whatever happened. And that is going to accelerate your movement through the sport.
All right, and one more episode for the year was my episode with Guy Winch, who is the author of Emotional First Aid. He was yet another sports psychologist I had on the show, and I just love Guy's work. He talks about how we just completely neglect the mental and emotional side of our bodies. We take medication for when things aren't physically right. We go to the doctors, but we never really do anything about the mental side of things. This kind of followed on nicely from the episode with Matt Davis. And this conversation is one that I think everyone should be docking in their favorites to listen to over and over again, and definitely recommend getting Guy's book. So I'm just going to take a moment to pass it over to Guy just quickly so you can hear some of his wisdom, and I definitely encourage you to go watch his TED Talk. So let's wrap it up with this episode from Guy, and then we will kind of wrap up for the episode. Thanks so much. When it comes to social media, we're very much kind of encouraged to share about our struggles or the things that we're going through. I can admit I push people a lot to kind of, talk about what you're going through. It will help. But after reading that, maybe it isn't for everyone. So can you kind of share with us your thoughts on maybe trauma, maybe just overall as a whole? What has been your findings with social media and kind of sharing about what you're struggling with?
So it's a tricky thing, really, because it's very, very individual. It's individual in this way. When we go through a certain trauma or loss, there are two kinds of people, really. And there are those who really feel the need to share, to talk about it, to really get it out, to process it in that way. And there are those who really feel the need not to. There are those who really feel like, I don't want to talk about it, I just want to move on. And the common wisdom in psychology is, if you don't talk about it, that's a problem. And it turns out it's not a problem. It's only a problem if you actually want to talk about it. If that's your want, if that's your impulse, and you're not, that might be a problem. But if you're the kind of person who just wants to move on, then it's often better for you to not talk about it. I think I mentioned also I had a couple of patients, obviously, I'm in New York City. I had plenty of patients that were impacted. I had one patient that died. I had one that was very injured. And when he came out of the hospital and he came to therapy, I didn't know, he came in, sat down and said, I'm okay now. I don't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And, your first impulse as a psychologist is to go, uh-oh. But I knew the research, and the research is if somebody doesn't want to talk about it and gets back to life and is functioning back in life, then that might be best for them. There's research about, when soldiers have trauma, they used to do this, critical incident debriefing, which for some of them wasn't good because some of them didn't want to debrief. Some of them wanted to just put it aside. Now, not many of us can put it aside and compartmentalize in that way. But for those who can and who want to, it's actually better to do that. For those who cannot or who don't want to, it's not. And they should actually talk about it. So that's one thing to be aware of, that when somebody's going through grief or loss, whether it's you, whether it's people around you, if they say, I don't really want to talk about it. Now, if they say, I don't want to talk about it, and they're, sitting in their room crying and they're not able to leave for a week, that's not good. Mm-hmm. But if they say, I don't want to talk about it, I just want to get on, and they are getting on, then let them be. Then follow that request. Don't urge them to talk about it, number one. Number two, you have to be aware that when you're talking about things, you are, in a way, defining yourself each time, right? You're defining who you are and what your experience is in the world. And when people are trying to overcome trauma, what we know that is most useful, and loss in that way, not just trauma but loss, is that if you can find a way to gain meaning from it, so that it has it's not just a plot point in your life story, but it's a point from which there is some potential growth to come. It's the point that in hindsight, looking back, that's when you realize the value of really being with family, et cetera, et cetera. That's when you realize the value of slowing down to be more present in your daily life. That's when you realized that the way you were going about things needed to be different. In other words, there was some insight, there was some change, there was some meaning that was derived from it. Now, you can't derive that when you're in that first moments of loss and of trauma. That comes within the steps of recovery. But I'm saying there that the way you talk about things, the way you share things, and again, maybe not in the first few moments, but thereafter, should be, in a way, also an exploration of where is the meaning that I derive here? How do I find a way to place this in my life narrative, mm-hmm. so that there was some kind of growth that I can derive from it, some kind of benefit that can come from this terrible thing.
All right, my friends, that was a long list of episodes, probably too many, but I thought it would be good to give a wrap up of all the episodes you guys recommended. Okay, not all, most of the episodes that you recommended to me as your favorites, and definitely some of mine. So I hope you enjoyed the little clips from each of those episodes, and I hope you will go back and check them out and then let me know what you think. There are links to all these episodes we talked about today in the show notes at tinamuir.com. That's TINAMUIR.com/episode 94. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. These will come out every Friday automatically to your favorite podcast player. But if you don't subscribe, you might miss out on bonus episodes, which do come out once a month. And I don't want you to miss out on those because they're usually so good. So please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you wouldn't mind, could you take a screenshot of this episode if you found it helpful and if there was some episodes within this that you really enjoyed, and share it to your Instagram or Facebook. That helps me to reach out new listeners. It will help your friends and family to find helpful information that they can listen to on their runs or while they're running errands or whatever else. But I really appreciate you sharing it, and that's just a great way for you to support me. Finally, I want to ask you to consider purchasing my Overcoming Amenorrhea book, which is going to come out in a few weeks. I will be telling you more about that later I guess next year. So early next year, I will be telling you more about that. But I really hope you will consider supporting me. It's not going to be much from a monetary standpoint for you, but it will go a long way for you. Every single copy I sell makes a difference. I've worked so hard on this, and especially as someone who was writing it while I was looking after my young baby, this has been what I put a lot of effort into. So thank you to everyone who has offered to be on my pre-launch team. I'm hoping to see those of you who live in the UK. I'm doing a meetup at the St Albans Park Run on the 5th of January. So if you do live in the UK, I hope you will consider joining me there. James Dunn will also be joining me there. So if you know Kinetic Revolution, you will get to meet James as well. And if you are running one of the Disney races or live in Florida to where you can get to Orlando, come join our meetup on the afternoon of the 12th of January. Send me an email, tina@tinamuir.com, if you want to join for either of those. I hope you have a wonderful new year, and I will see you next year.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.